Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Elliot, Lawry.
I'm Emma Gillespie.
This week, a woman was awarded $93,000 by a New South Wales court over an unlawful police strip search at a 2018 music festival. Strip searches are supposed to be conducted under exceptional circumstances only, in the most serious and urgent situations. But recent figures suggest they're being conducted far more frequently. Over the past decade, the number of young people alleging they were searched unlawfully, often in humiliating and invasive circumstances, has remained high. In today's podcast, we're going to talk you through the landmark class action against New South Wales Police and what it means for the future of strip searches at music festivals.
Elliot, you've got a really important and super interesting case to talk us through today, and one that has been a really long time coming, I might add.
Yeah.
We've been tracking this one over the last few years here at TDA. But before we jump into the specifics of this one, I think a good place to start would be explaining a little bit about strip searches themselves. What are they?
So, strip searches are commonly enforced police tactics at Aussie music festivals. I think anyone who's listening who's been to a music festival is pretty familiar with this sort of scene of, police walking up and down a line while you're waiting to enter. They often have sniffer dogs.
Yep.
And now and again, they'll pull people out of the line for a search.
Yep. You've probably also seen sniffer dogs at train stations. That's another kind of really common place where we know strip searches can occur.
Yeah, that's really key. So it's not just music festivals, it's actually a lot of places where there's live events.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that strip search laws differ between the states and the territories. Broadly, these different pieces of legislation have a lot in common, but there are some variations, which we'll get into shortly.
Okay.
Generally, though, a strip search involves a person having to remove some or all of their clothing, and that's different to a general search where police just pat you down on the outside of your clothes.
Okay, so when or why might police opt to conduct a strip search over, say, that general kind of pat-down search?
Yeah, for sure. So police must reasonably suspect that you're carrying something illegal on you, like drugs, in order to perform a strip search.
Okay, so they have to suspect that you're concealing something illicit.
Exactly. And in New South Wales, where this lawsuit was filed, police can't perform a strip search unless the, quote, seriousness and urgency of the circumstances make it necessary. Now, that's coming from the legislation that gives police powers to perform the strip search. There's these really clear guidelines.
Yeah, so those guidelines kind of make it a last resort.
Exactly. And during a search, an officer can look someone in the mouth, but they're not allowed to explore any other cavities like their genitals. They also shouldn't ask a person to remove any more clothing than is reasonably necessary.
Okay.
Now, the last piece of information that you need to know is that for a strip search to happen, it should be undertaken by an officer of the same sex as the person who's being searched.
All right, so that gives us a sense of the legal framework in place in New South Wales for police there to conduct strip searches. Obviously, there have been these mounting allegations to suggest that the rules aren't being followed, though, by police in some cases. So what do we know about these unlawful searches?
Yeah, I think over the last decade, we've definitely seen a lot of cases of festival goers and other community members accusing the police of undertaking these unlawful strip searches. In October 2018, we even saw the launch of an inquiry into the New South Wales Police by the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission after it had received a number of complaints about strip searches. Now, the report that came out of that inquiry found that police consistently stepped over the line of what the laws actually allow them to do, pointing to inconsistencies in the way that officers are trained and also the operating procedures that they undertake. The inquiry also collected expert evidence on the sort of psychological trauma that people often experience during and after a strip search, especially amongst young people. That's a really common thread that we saw.
Yep.
Now, jump forward a couple of years and a class action lawsuit was lodged against the New South Wales Police in 2022, with more than 3,000 people saying that they had been subjected to unlawful strip searches.
Okay, so this all comes within a context of heightened scrutiny over the police force, especially in New South Wales, and about the kind of lawfulness or alleged unlawfulness of how they are conducting searches, particularly against young people at music festivals. So that kind of culminates in this class action in 2022, this large group of people joining together to take on the New South Wales police force. And that is what's known as a class action when you have a big group of people that bring a lawsuit. But this case is actually centered around the experiences of one woman in particular, this lead plaintiff, as all class actions have. Can you talk me through who she is and what happened on her side and what is her story to kind of kick all of this off?
Yeah, so the lead plaintiff in this case is named Raya Meredith. She is a woman who was attending Splendor in the Grass in 2018 when she was 27 years old. And before she even entered the Byron Festival, she was approached by a police officer with a drug detection dog who sniffed in her direction and then quickly moved on to the next person. But shortly after that, the officer actually came back and tapped her on the shoulder and directed her to a makeshift area near the festival entrance, which is where they took her bag.
Okay, so this person, Raya Meredith, went to Splendor. A sniffer dog came near her but moved away, and then she was tapped on the shoulder.
Yep, that's very important.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to pause before I tell you this next part just because I do want to give a little content warning. What I'm about to say is quite distressing. But basically, Raya told the court that the area that she was searched in was comprised of a number of open, makeshift cubicles, each closed in by a 1.5 meter high screen. Now, she explained it would have been super easy for someone to look into the cubicle, and you have to remember that where she's being searched is just next to the festival entrance, so it's a really high traffic area.
Yeah.
Now, once inside the cubicle, a female officer entered and proceeded to pat down Raya, do a general search, and she then asked her, "Have you inserted anything?" To which Raya responded, "No, I have a tampon in." The officer then said, "If you are lying, you will get kicked out of this festival." Raya told the court she was then asked to remove her clothes on the lower half of her body, including her underwear. She was then also instructed to pull out her tampon and show it to the officer. Raya said she only managed to get it about halfway out before the officer then bent down and pulled on the string of the tampon.
Okay, so as you flagged, an extremely distressing recount. And we also know, though, based on the legal parameters of strip searches that you outlined earlier, Elliot, that there are already a few breaches there in that anecdote. Is that where the search ended?
Hello, Billy here from TDA. We have just looked at our YouTube analytics and 95% of you who are watching our videos aren't subscribing. If you want to help independent media like us grow, the best way you can do that is by pressing subscribe. Thank you so much, and back to the video.
No, so Raya actually said that she was then directed by the female police officer to turn around and bend over. At this point in time, a male police officer then entered the cubicle unannounced to return her bag. He said there was no drugs found in the bag, but obviously she was in a very compromising position. Raya said she quickly put her clothes back on, but she was subjected to further police questioning after that. And all in all, that process took about 30 minutes.
30 minutes in a situation like that sounds like probably a time frame that would feel like a lifetime. So did police find any illicit substances during that quite rigorous process?
No, they did not find any drugs during the strip search. And during the court's judgment earlier this week, we actually heard about how the ordeal left Raya feeling embarrassed, humiliated, and suffering from extreme shock. And the judge even read out some pretty upsetting testimony that described how once inside the festival, Raya was not able to change her tampon because her hands were shaking so violently.
Yeah, I was going to say that's one ordeal in and of itself, but then, presumably she goes into the festival to join her friends and just kind of has to carry on like everything's normal. This, though, and I think it's important to point out, this is one story that is part of a class action of thousands of other alleged unlawful strip searches. So how have police responded to this action?
Well, when the class action was first lodged in the New South Wales Supreme Court, police were pretty ready to defend their actions. They originally argued that the officers were in their right to perform the search because the police dog sniffed in Raya's direction. But right before the hearing was about to begin, we actually saw a massive backflip from the defense. They basically withdrew 22 witnesses that were going to take the stand. They were going to be giving evidence that sort of contradicted Raya's testimony.
Right.
And they also conceded that the search that they had conducted was out of their right and that it was completely unlawful.
What did we learn from the judgment about strip searches in New South Wales, more broadly? How did the class action wrap up?
So the judgment was pretty lengthy. I know because I watched all 3 hours of it. So Justice Yahir was pretty stern while delivering her judgment on Tuesday. She described the training and supervision of officers in the field as wholly unacceptable, and said that the implied power to order a strip search doesn't actually exist. Rather, they actually need to be consented to. You can't order one. And I want to go back to the legislation that I mentioned earlier, which says that the circumstances needed to warrant a strip search have to be serious, urgent, and necessary. And this is something that Justice Yahir pointed to as well. saying that police pretty much failed on all 3 of those tests. And ultimately, the court ruled in favor of Raya, awarding her $93,000 as compensation for battery, assault, false imprisonment, and aggravated damages. Now, I want to point out that she will likely receive some more money, some additional damages, but these can't be calculated yet because the rest of the class action needs to be settled to then determine exactly how much she is owed.
So that was going to be my next question then, because this is a class action involving 3,000 other people who've signed on, right? So we have some compensation for the lead plaintiff, but what happens to the rest of the plaintiffs?
At the moment, the fate of the other plaintiffs is very much up in the air. The court has not yet decided what they will be owed, if they'll be owed anything, but from the sounds of things, they definitely will be. We do know, though, that the New South Wales government could be liable to pay up to $150 million in damages once all the other claims are determined.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it sure is. Now, legal firm Slater & Gordon, they're the ones who led this class action alongside the Redfern Legal Centre. They said it's urging New South Wales Police to negotiate a settlement for the remainder of the group, saying, if a sensible settlement cannot be achieved, the cost to the state will be far higher. Now, the law firm has said that this case means that more people could be entitled to compensation if they were also unlawfully strip searched in the time period being 2016 to 2022. They're also looking into opening up an additional class action for those most recent cases too.
Okay.
Now, the matter is set to return to court later this month, and that's when we'll find out what will happen to the rest of the class action.
Okay, so a few more moving parts, and looking at that language from Slater and Gordon that, if a settlement can't be reached, that the costs will be higher. I think, that it's important to remember with class actions that a settlement isn't necessarily an admission of guilt, but that these legal representatives are obviously saying that there's a lot more steam in the tank to take this further, and court proceedings are expensive. So it'll be fascinating to see what happens now. But Elliot, zooming out, away from this case, thinking about festivals more broadly, is this the end of strip searches at New South Wales festivals?
I wish I had the answer for that. I don't at the moment, but because we do have this judgment, it's definitely going to change things. So it's set a legal precedent that'll make it a lot easier for people to bring claims against the police.
Yeah.
And also because we've had this case, I think police will be wary of all the scrutiny that is potentially on them now. And I would say that their procedures are going to have a big shakeup internally. If I was to guess, I think it's pretty unlikely they'll stop altogether, but this could lead to an overhaul of strip search laws and a walking back of police powers. Either way, we do have festival season just around the corner, so I think we'll see in the coming months exactly how this will play out.
So interesting. Elliot, thank you for summarising that one for us. Such a fascinating case that I know a lot of our listeners have really cared about.
Thanks, Em.
And thank you for listening to today's episode. We'll be back a little later on with your evening news headlines, but until then, have a great day.
Bye.